Okay, if we could, we'll go ahead and call this first of our interim meetings for natural resources to order. If we could, everyone, please go ahead and grab your seat and silence your cell phones if you don't mind. And at this time, if you'll join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, well, I say welcome to each of you, but we have a couple members that have asked to be recognized. Representatives Given Prunty, I'm going to turn it over to you for a second. I think you have a special guest.
Yes, I do. Where'd he go? Here, Mr. Chase Whitehouse. He just graduated from Muhlenberg County High School. He's getting ready to head to American University in Washington, D.C., and with a major in international studies and a focus on American foreign policy and national security. And he's interested in nuclear energy. So that's glad to have him with me today.
We also have a special guest joining us today who's been had quite a busy time of it. Richard White is with us, and wanted to welcome you back to the committee, and glad to have you back with us there. Oh, you got your wife with you. Would you like to introduce your wife? You can't hide from us. We see you back there. If you want to stand up, welcome to it. We're glad to have you all back to us. Welcome to it.
Yes, Chairman. I'm glad to be back here, and I sure appreciate all the prayers from everybody. I got my wife here, Valerie. She kind of guided me along. I don't know where she went, but Valerie, oh, there you are. I may have her come up here if you all don't care, because I lost my hearing.
Yeah, you please bring her up.
I missed the Pledge of Allegiance. I didn't even hear that.
If you'd like to join him, you're welcome to come up.
But thank you all.
Well, welcome back. I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Gooch, my co-chair, just for a second, just some introductory comments.
No, thank you. It's great to be back with starting the interim. We have a lot of issues that are going to be coming up next. I think we all in this country are seeing what failed energy policy really produces as far as high gas prices, high inflation, and that sort of thing. And I think we're really concerned that MISO has actually announced that they are expecting some blackouts and brownouts this year because of a lack of reliable power, now that we're looking to take, I think, about 12.5 gigawatts of coal-fired electricity off the grid. And that's taking us down a road that we've never been before, and certainly this committee is going to be looking at some of those issues and hopefully trying to prepare our citizens, but also doing all that we can to prevent those terrible things from happening. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good, Mr. Chairman Gooch. Thank you for those comments. Representative Fugate had an event with his church and could not make it, so I just want to duly note that he's checked in with us and he'll be following the minutes of the meetings. If you do have something that comes up over the summer and can't make it, please let us as chairman know so we can make sure that the people know where you are if you can't be here. At this time, I'd like to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Senator Carpenter, Senator Caslin, Senator Embry, Senator Harper Angel, Senator Schickel, Senator Southworth, Senator Turner, here. Senator Webb, here. Senator Westerfield, Senator Wheeler, here. Representative Blanton, here. Representative Bowling, Representative Bridges, here. Representative Birch, here. Representative Cantrell, Representative Dossett, Representative Dotson, here. Representative Duplessis, Representative Flannery,
here.
Representative Fugate, Representative Johnson,
here.
Representative Kirk McCormick, here. Representative Marzian, Representative Miles, Representative Gibbons Prunty,
Here.
Representative Scott, Representative Stevenson, Representative Wesley,
Here.
Representative White,
Here.
Chair Smith,
Present.
and Chair Gooch.
Here.
All right, looks like we have a quorum at this time. We'll go ahead and get straight into our meetings. we have the first is emerging trends in the energy markets, and I think Co-Chairman Gooch had kind of given you a pretty good kickoff of what concerns this committee and why we're going to be looking more into this summer, because as he duly commented, we're into sort of new territory here, what we're seeing with energy in the United States. So at this time, we have Dr. Rodney Andrews. It's very, very good to see you, my friend. If you want to go ahead and come to the table. Is anybody else with you today, Dr. Andrews? All right, very good. Well, thank you very much for coming to see us and kicking off our summer meetings. And at this time, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you all for inviting me to talk today. I'm going to cover what we see as the emerging trends in basically the short term on energy markets.
There we go. All right, I don't know how to use your system though. Uh-oh. We have a Zoom issue.
It's at least a year.
All right, thanks. So I'll get right into what are going to be the major concerns for the energy markets right now. The biggest one being that it's uncertainty, particularly in petroleum and natural gas, both pricing and supply going into the next 2 years. And I do want to make a point of pointing out that this is not completely due to Russia and Ukraine. That does play a role, but that is not the primary driver that we have in the United States for what we're seeing. This just gives you a whole bunch of highlights just taken in the last 2 or 3 days of headlines about the prices of natural gas and oil. And what you can see is that, you know, many of the banks are upgrading what they think the price is going to be over the next 24 months. Natural gas is at a 13-year high, and we're expecting a hot summer. As Representative Gooch said, you know, there are concerns with blackouts, certainly rolling brownouts through much of the West. And you can see that, you know, the costs from the daily highlight, this was from Tuesday, you know, we're well over $120 a barrel for both Brent and West Texas Intermediate crude oil. Natural gas is at the highest it's been, and that's being reflected in the prices of gasoline and diesel as well. Why is a range of factors. The biggest drivers right now on price are, in the short term, sanctions on Russia's oil production, which is causing issues in Europe, which is causing us to export more hydrocarbons because of the price. OPEC is playing games. They're basically announcing that there's going to be lower demand so that they are not increasing their production, which is just a roundabout way of saying we're going to keep prices high. And then the other one, which is very much domestic, is the rate at which the oil and gas producers actually increase their own production. There are a lot of permits that could be exercised that are not, and that's just a reflection of the fact that with prices high, it's favorable towards them. A big issue in the prices of gasoline is that Brent crude, which is what we use as the benchmark for that price, is very strong. I will point out that it is less than it was in 2008. Now, if you remember what happened right around 2008, that's also not that encouraging. But it is, even in real dollars, is quite a bit lower. The Energy Information Agency is forecasting that that's going to remain $110 to $120 a barrel for the remainder of 2022, with forecasts that it's going to fall off below 100 as we get into 2023. And a lot of that will be adjustments. Right now, some of that pressure is that oil inventories are very low. We don't have a reserve. And so if we need more, we're competing on flat price for that, which is also giving a lot of volatility in those prices. Gasoline and diesel prices really are reflecting what are called the refining margins or the wholesale margin. And that's the difference in the price for wholesale gasoline sold to essentially the price of Brent crude oil. Right now, that margin is about $1.17 a gallon. It's expected to drop off to a more normal amount of about 80 cents a gallon. And so you can see that's about 40 cents on the price right there that is elevated because of that wholesale margin. And so they're forecasting the gasoline prices to begin to ease. Down as low as $4.25. They're not predicting below $4 in the near term. And diesel is following that trend, but it's about $1 above gasoline right now. This is Brent crude oil futures. This is going out for the forward 20 month. And what you're seeing, these again are from June 7th. And what you can see is that the futures price is headed downward, more towards that $90, $95 a barrel range. Unfortunately, the orange line there is the actual volumes that estimate's based on. So you can see that once you get out a year, it's a pretty weak prediction, but it is fairly consistent across most of the markets and most of the agencies that do this. The good news is that crude oil production is up from where it was, and it is predicted to increase significantly in the coming year as we get into 2023. Most of that is lower 48, which also helps with price. But as you can see from the bright red obvious arrow I put there, a huge issue for us right now is our inventories are extremely low. We're down 57 million barrels compared to this time last year. So there's not a whole lot of flex in the market. And one of the issues is that this is the time of year where normally you do maintenance on refineries, so they're at sort of their low. And this year we're actually having to operate those at like 90%. So that's fine if we can do it as long as we don't run into some problem. And we could lose, and then we lose a refinery for whatever reason. Gasoline, distillates, just everything else. The blue line there is the retail price. And you can see, again, predictions are that it's going to drop, come down to the $4 range, perhaps a bit lower. The little cartoon there is just sort of showing how the price of gasoline is derived, and about 60% of it is the crude costs. So that's the one that we can look at the futures there. The top of that is taxes, and those are fairly stable. The bits that are causing issues again are the refining and the distribution and marketing. That's where that marketing margin is increasing and pushing up there. So you've got the crude oil price going up, and then you have on top of that these margins that need to come down. And part of that, again, you can see in the lower graph there with the red arrow, is that besides having a deficit in crude storage inventories, we also have a very significant deficit compared to past years in the amount of gasoline we have in inventory. And so that can cause issues when something gets tight. There's not a whole lot that can lighten that, and so that will cause price to go up. There's a great deal of sort of back and forth in people who do modeling in this area about where and what's the U.S. price where we'll start seeing a change in behavior and use of gasoline. And it's generally, the the quick and easy one is $5. When you get close to 5, you'll see people stop traveling. You'll see people start changing the type of cars they buy. Now there's that option to go to electrical vehicles in some areas. But we're right on the edge of where is this going to really start having long-term impacts. If that does, then we may see the price artificially come down just in order to keep volume up. Natural gas may be the more concerning issue. The prices there are rising again because inventories are the lowest they've been below in the 5-year average. We are seeing a very steady demand for liquefied natural gas exports. I think in the past I've mentioned to this committee a concern with the number of permits we were giving to build LNG export terminals. We are now seeing that is exasperated by the fact that Europe is is getting cut off from Russian gas. So there's the demand there. And there is high demand for natural gas in the electric power sector. And one of the reasons is that it's no longer easy to switch from gas back to coal. And I'll go through some of those reasons. Our inventories at a 5-year low, we had about 2 trillion cubic feet. That's 15% below the 5-year average. So we're just short that amount of gas in the system right now. We're projecting, EIA projects that's going to get a bit better to 9%, but that's still not great when we think about having instability in this market, particularly with the things that are going on in Europe. U.S. production, however, is forecast to increase in the remainder of 2022 with further increases in 2023, which hopefully, if we maintain steady on our exports, will help relieve the issues with gas and domestically. Demand is increasing or steady, about 85 billion cubic feet a day, but 11 to 12 of that is exported. Electric power, use continues very strong. That is a big factor of that is coal plant closures, the need to back up renewables, and again the difficulty in switching from gas to coal. One of the issues that it's difficult to switch from gas to coal is because we've closed those plants, and you can't just turn one back on. The price is going to remain strong for natural gas probably through mid-2023. Right now, we're talking about 8.7 million million BTU through towards the end of this year. It should lighten, hopefully, after that. That 8.7 is interesting because it's 9.2 yesterday. The hope is that, or the prediction, I should say, is that it will continue to drop down to about the 5. So we're not going to get back down below 3. But a more reasonable number around 5, and that's probably where the settle will be. But the timing remains uncertain as we go further out, and some of that is international uncertainty as well. Marketed natural gas production this is the predictions for it to increase compared to where we are now. That's quite likely just because of the dynamics in the market there. And what we're seeing, again, is a lot of this production is not traditional sources. This is, again, in the shale plays. We are pretty dependent on that, which means it's a little tighter on the economics of it comparatively to, say, Gulf Coast. Exports are continuing to increase. There's been a lot of change here. What you can see, if you look at the large graph there, right at where that history projection line is, you can see that we're on this fairly steep increase in exports right now. It's unclear how long or short term that's going to be before it flattens out, and that's mostly because, as you can see there on the right, exports to Europe are going up dramatically, and that's not going to change in the near term simply because of the loss of Russian gas going into that market. But you can also see that the majority of the gain there is in the eastern gas fields and the shales. Natural gas prices are, as I said, likely to hang where they are now and begin to ease as we get into the end of 2022 into early 2023. And those the numbers that we were giving, we were talking 8 to 5. That's Henry Hub, so that's the purchase price. Retail is going to remain higher than it has been going back a few years, but will lighten somewhat. One thing to note here is that the U.S. is the largest natural gas producer in the world right now. Unfortunately, with what's going on in Europe right now, Russia is the second largest producer. And so if that drops out of the European market, the U.S. is likely to see people wanting to export because of the increased value for doing that. The other thing there is that we are seeing both China and India buying more from Russia. So that may actually lighten a little bit of some of the demand due to China. And then the bottom graph is really that's very much the long-term projection, so it's very uncertain. But what you can see is that the projection is for it to, again, the price to come down. Unfortunately, there is also a great deal of uncertainty, as you can tell from the fact that there's that huge upper limit on the estimate. That's very unlikely to happen, however. Coal, we're seeing a forecast for increase in production. And again, this is for the places that can switch to coal, switching to coal. And that is being picked up by Western coal primarily. And then it's projected into going into next year, hopefully as natural gas prices come down. Unfortunately, you'll see then a lightening in the demand for coal as well. And those losses are probably going to be from the Appalachian and interior basins simply because of the economic costs for that coal. What's causing all this? Coal use in the electric power sector is declining, and it will continue to decline. You can see there the 85% of retirements in 2022 were for coal plants. That's also projected to continue, although that is likely to level in the next couple of years. A big factor in coal demand is replenishing the power sector. Inventories are quite low, and also high prices in export. When Germany turned off its nuclear plants and switched to gas, and now the Russians are turning off their gas, they're looking back to coal to stabilize their electric markets, which means the export value is very high. Coal consumption, again, there is projected to come down. More importantly right now is, as you can see from the blue arrow on the right, the difference between our average inventories and where we are today. We're very short on inventory. That is causing issues. As we head into the high heating days where there's more demand for electricity, availability of coal and long-term availability is a concern. If that can't be lessened, and the issue again there is that export value is very high as well. When we look at electric power, this is very general. This is not specific to Kentucky. We expect that consumption is going to continue to increase, particularly over like 2020. And that's projected to be a slight increase in both 2022 and 2023. And that, with all the other factors we've talked about, also then leads to a projection that, the residential price is going to stay the same or have some volatility, not wildly, but also not dropping. Mid-range trends for electricity are a little different in that we do have the issue nationally of continued closures of coal-fired power plants, taking that base out of the grid, which means we're running into reliability issues. That's obviously a concern as we go into high demand months where you can end up with blackouts or brownouts, and that happens. We've avoided that in the East primarily, but that and it has happened in the West in the last few years. We would hopefully continue to avoid that. Kentucky's fairly stable because of our generation mix. And those coal delivery contract issues where the inventories are low are hopefully short term, but that is going to depend on how high the export market remains as well. We are seeing very rapid decreases in the cost of solar energy. Just in the cost of the actual capital cost of installation has come down dramatically. We will probably continue to see installation of solar into the grid. That's fine as far as it goes. However, we still have the lack of storage to offset that being intermittent. And where that causes pressures on the cost of electricity is that then means you're again falling back on natural gas as the backup that can be turned on and off quickly enough to deal with that change. And so that the low cost in renewables may actually cause more issues and uncertainty in that market. Interest in nuclear, however, does continue to expand. It is sort of viewed as the reliable carbon-free baseload that can offset the volatility in renewables if we are looking at decarbonizing our electric power. That's going to be a bigger issue, obviously, if we choose to move to primarily an electric transport system. Demand for electricity is going to go up. It has to come from somewhere. And so that will stress current generation capacity, and that will need to be handled. Nuclear is viewed there as a quite viable option in that it's sustainable long term. It's low carbon or no carbon, and it provides base load. One of the drivers there as well is the newer version of nuclear, whether it's more modern large-scale plants or what's gaining a lot of traction are small modular reactors. These are manufacturable, which means they don't have to be completely constructed on site, saving the economics both in capital and in installation. And we are seeing large growth in federal investment looking at continued technology development and improvement for nuclear. This is just to give you an idea of how much the price of solar has come down. Going back to 1976 isn't necessarily that reasonable, but if you look just in the last 10 years, you can see that decline, and it continues. Most of this is from improvements in materials, but also in a learning rate, meaning we install a lot more. We put more of it into the grid, which means we're better at doing it, and that helps with the costs. And then another point, as I mentioned, with the small modular reactors, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has approved NuScale Power's SMR design, which means it can be implemented. And the cartoon there is of the first planned installation. It would be 12 of their units installed at Idaho National Lab to run the local power grid there. So just summarizing this to kind of put it all in one spot, gasoline and diesel costs will likely ease somewhat, but they're going to remain at that $4 a gallon at least until early 2023 and could go further. It is a downward adjustment that is expected, however. So it would be surprising if they don't lighten unless there's some other major interruption. Natural gas pricing is likely to remain at or above current prices as we get into the first quarter of 2023, but the settle is expected to be near $5 for gas. Coal probably remains at its current demand and current pricing, but again, that's going to depend on how exports go and whether we can make up the inventory. Natural gas pricing will probably drive the overall electric markets, at least in the near term. Longer term, lowering prices for all the other options should help take off some of the reliance on natural gas and its dominance in the pricing. However, as I began with, uncertainty is going to remain very high in these markets through 2023, and some of that's going to depend on what's happening globally and not just nationally. So thank you.
Very good, Dr. Andrews. Thank you for your comments and your insight. Do we have any members that have requested to speak. Senator Wheeler, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To what extent is the inability to switch from gas back to coal being driven by, I guess, bureaucratic policies coming out of Washington that are anti-coal?
I guess I would be hesitant to say bureaucratic policy at the moment. Financial policy is a big one. You can't finance a coal plant. You also can't finance if you have to replace your boiler. To restart a boiler, you're probably talking $20 to $30 million if it's been closed long enough. And so getting those kinds of funds, if you're looking to federal loan agencies like you see with rural co-ops, it's very difficult to get that money.
Brief follow-up, Mr. Chairman. And is that due to, I guess, for lack of a better term, woke policies and certain banking institutions that do not want to support anything but green energy policies?
It's more hesitancy in those markets, and that they're concerned that if they invest into coal and then we go back to something like the Clean Power Plan where those plants will be put out, they're not going to recoup their investment. So it is a concern about federal policy, but it's not necessarily a currently enacted policy. It's the fear of a future policy.
And just briefly, I lived in Germany for a year, very clean, recycle focused place. And so they're actually looking to switch back towards coal at this point, and yet we in the United States are having policies out of Washington that would discourage such activities.
That is a pretty reasonable statement. The Germany had moved to nuclear, and then with change in its government, about 6-7 years ago, decided to back away from nuclear power. More just because of their desire to go green. What that resulted in was them becoming reliant on Russian gas. Because they had replaced coal with nuclear, then they were backing away, then they had brought coal back on, then they decided to back away from coal, then they went to gas, and now they're sort of out of options. And so they're looking at if they're going to be reliable, at least for the amount of time that would take them to move to, a much higher proportion of renewables in their mix. They're lacking baseload now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good. Chairman Gooch.
Dr. Andrews, I think that there's no question that the Biden administration is at least talking about forcing companies through the SEC and to actually talk about when they make investments in coal or they're doing these other things that they have to provide environmental costs and other things. So, I would argue that there are policies from Washington that is causing a reluctance for the banking industry and the finance industry to loan money to these coal plants.
Yes, I think that's true. I think the largest hesitancy is no one is going to bankroll a new plant because it's too unstable. As you said, that it's becoming more and more complicated. The capital markets don't want that risk, simply because if you get closed, they lose the $3 or $4 billion they put into it. So you are correct that many of those policies and what they're doing through the financial markets are pushing the investors away from any investments in coal.
Mr. Chairman, I might follow up. One thing else that we really haven't talked about here today, as you know, even there's a big discussion about whether or not we should be producing our own natural gas and oil as opposed to trying to buy it from countries like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and other countries. But I think that there hasn't been a new refinery built in this country since the mid-'70s, I think. And we're about to get to the point where even if we were to ramp up production of those fuels and even transporting it through the pipelines that have been killed by this administration, whether or not we really could seriously ramp up our own production of gas and diesel and motor fuels because of the lack of refinery. Is that
it is a concern. As I mentioned, we're in where you would normally be doing maintenance, and we're having to run at 90% capacities. So if we have a refinery go down, that is certainly going to push very much upward on the prices of distillates. We have not built a new refinery. We have expanded refineries in that time period. So we do have refining capacity for current demand, but as you know, when you're at 95% utilization, there's no cushion. And so effectively we are running up against running out, as it were, of that capacity. And another issue that goes along with that, however, is that we export refined products. We export gasoline. We export natural gas liquids. And so those are things that could be going into the U.S. market that essentially are taking away from domestic refining, because we're using refining capacity to do it, and then we're exporting. So there's some makeup that could be done there as well.
Yeah, just to follow up, I do think there is some of our folks in Congress that sort of have a bit of a detachment with this. You recently had a Democrat congresswoman say that these prices would force families into buying much more efficient electrical vehicles, and it won't. I think some people can, but I think for the majority, people that are already struggling to pay these bills will simply cut back on groceries or cut back on other things, as opposed to going out and buying a $35,000 electric car, maybe a $27,000 electric car. But I think it makes it tougher and an undue burden on a lot of working families that are already seeing 30% cost of their groceries, inflation, or probably more, that this is not going to encourage them to say, this is our time to go get a hybrid car. I think it's just going to make it much more difficult on families that are already having a tough time. But that's my own opinion. But we do have several other members. We have 3 other members that have questions on this. We also have Kent Chandler that's going to speak next. So just wanted to cue everyone in of our time, and that there will be a lot of other information in front of you. But next is Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have an original question, but as usual, Chairman Gooch is one step ahead and asked my question. But I will follow up. I do have a follow-up question with the statement that the Chairman just made. And this is almost simplistic, but what are the energy sources that generate the electricity for electric-powered vehicles?
It's the same mix we have today. So it is going to be 40% natural gas. It'll be 20% nuclear, 20% coal, and then everything else. And when we talk, when I mention that solar's cheap and we'll see more installation, you have to remember that that's marginal. It's 2% changes in long term. We're not going to be solar anytime soon or renewables as the dominant one. If the price of gas goes up to 25, like is that worst case scenario, you might see a lot of change there. But right now, the mix is going to be fossil, nuclear, and then renewables. And if we're switching our transportation over to electric primarily, that will stress all of that. And quite honestly, my view is that we do not have the storage capacity currently to put much more, over a couple more percent of renewables into the grid at the moment without really causing issues with stability.
Thank you for that answer. Quick follow-up comment. I just wanted to point out that for those who think that electric vehicles is the answer to all of our energy problems, those electric vehicles have to get electricity from somewhere. And that somewhere are the very same sources that we're curtailing now with our federal policies. And that's got to change. We need to pay attention to what the people are going through. We need to get back to what we know works, which is an all of the above answer for our production and refinement facilities. Electric vehicles will not be the answer. we are going to have to get our production back up to where it was just a few years ago. And I thank you for your comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. We have Representative Blanton next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick comment and then a question for Dr. Andrews. Thank you, Dr. Andrews, for being here and for your presentation. Sadly, I don't see any media outlets here. They tend to not want to cover facts. One of the things that you've dispelled for us here today, something that the current president and his minions in the fake news agenda are saying, well, our gas prices are all because of the war with Russia and Ukraine. We know that's not true. You've said that's not the only cause of the gas prices being where they are. We know that because the gas prices began to inflate prior to the war ever beginning over there. So that's one thing I want to point out. And again, sadly, no media here to cover that. They don't want the people to be well informed. They want them to be informed on the things they want them to believe. Secondly, I want to talk about our energy sectors, our utilities, our coal-fired plants that's disappearing across this country. And part of that goes back into the misinformation that's being fed through media outlets, through propaganda, to make people believe things. And unfortunately, so many people believe it because they simply hear it. But the fact of the matter is, for these companies, including utility companies, that think they're going to push us greener and greener towards renewable, we're seeing blackouts already. We're seeing brownouts. They're not going to be sustainable for us in the long-term future. As a matter of fact, I've listened to one expert that tells us that we are actually getting more of our pollution is coming from China through the Gulf Stream into the United States than what we're producing ourselves. So why aren't we sticking with our coal-fired plants? That is a reliable source of energy. It's a cheaper source of energy. We talk about these electric vehicles. If we went all electric right now, we couldn't provide the electricity to charge all those vehicles. Okay? Well, we may do away with the coal mines, but we're still building roads. Show me a dozer big enough that can push the dirt and has a battery capacity that will run that dozer to do the job we have now. It doesn't exist. Unfortunately, people are living in a utopia. And my question is, how long before this bubble is going to burst and people are going to have to realize we've got to be dependent like we originally were on our fossils and stop being so blindly following after this renewable stuff that's just not there yet. I'm not saying it won't get there eventually, but it's certainly not there yet.
I think probably the thing that can put some perspective on that is estimates for us to begin to see any substantial battery storage going into the grid. So what we would expect to be seeing, not pumped hydro, which we do now and all of that, we're between 10 and 15 years away from that to begin to be a substantial. So until that's in place, we really can't move much further. You can in some parts of the country, where it's sunny 14 hours a day and you don't have a whole lot of change throughout the year, and you're willing to pay the prices for natural gas. But through the remainder of the economy, we can't move much beyond a few more percent until we do run up against what you're saying. And if we totally electrify transport, that's 1/3 more power that would have to come from electricity. That's not likely to happen. We may see broader use of hydrogen as a fuel. That does address some of the issues with long-haul heavy machinery, but you have to produce the hydrogen somewhere. And that's either going to be by reforming natural gas or electrolysis. And electrolysis takes electricity. So we are, at a point where we can't just suddenly turn a switch. The estimates of doing that, of going to all renewables, are around $4 to $7 trillion. So when they would say that we need an Apollo program for energy, the Apollo program costs less than $1 trillion. And we're talking 5 times that to 7 times that if we just abandon what we're doing now.
Dr.
Thank you,
Andrews,
Chairman.
I just want to add that when people don't have access to power, and I saw this in my time in China, when they began to shut off the power and brown down to get ready for the games, for the U.S. Olympics, I think they thought that would help them by cleaning up and making it look better. But you know what happened? Everybody that I went to visit took me back in some part of their property and showed me their brand new Caterpillar generators that they had. So what they created was a toxic pollution rate that they'd never seen before. It triggered a point what was called crazy bad in the programming network there for how bad the air quality was. So when you have a country like the United States who when we don't start having these brownouts and people start losing power, a lot of people are not going to accept that. They're going to go out. They're going to have power, and so it's funny. You have the people marching and they're wanting to do all this stuff out there, not realizing what it will trigger if we don't have a strong, affordable, reliable grid. And just by saying fossil fuels are bad and this is going to be better, is going to trigger something that I'm not sure that they understand fully what will happen. And you'd mentioned earlier about banks and people don't want to do the funding for these fossil plants because of the risk. And I want to clear that up, not because of the risk of the technology of the fossil fuel, risk of the banana republic atmosphere that's in the United States right now, that you may have a president come in that could disrupt the policy and cause you to lose your investment, which is what's happened to many of our investors years ago in Venezuela and a lot of other countries that they invested and built out to have an entire new regime come in and just take all your investment and destroy it. So now we're at a point to where you almost have to have this sort of banana republic insurance to be a energy investor in the United States, which is sad. But I think it's a unique point. I think that that we are very capable. I think we have the technology and the type of people to solve the problem. You said the Apollo problem or expenses for that. I saw where Elon Musk had spent less on one of his rockets than what NASA spent on their Christmas party. I think what we need is more people like Elon Musk to be able to do stuff that we used to do here in this country. The greatest generation built buildings and did stuff because they didn't have MSHA. A lot of these other, not just really an MSHA, they didn't have all the government bureaucracy in their way, and they were able to do great things. And I think that we have got the mindset in our colleges and our schools of people that are like Elon Musk that can challenge these numbers and can do things much cheaper, much more affordable, if we would simply get out of their way and let a lot of these people challenge the system the way it is right now. So I feel we've got capable people in our universities and our businesses that can help us solve the energy problem if the government would often step out of their way or quit regulating them or get our hand off the scale for trying to decide on what we think is best instead of letting the market and the engineers and the people that understand this stuff really be turned loose at the genius that makes America great. So again, that's my soapbox for now, but I will turn it over to Representative Prunty, who's our last question on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your work. I deeply respect it. On page 3, it was of the handout, you were talking about, you kept saying the crude oil inventories were way down. My dad was a pipe fitter for 39 years, so it kind of catches my interest. I'm just wondering why. I didn't hear the why in your presentation.
A lot of that has to do with releasing oil into the market to try to lessen the pressure on price. The other is, again, sanctions against Russian oil. That didn't just impact Europe itself, but it also impacted the global flows because you had redirection into different places. You had places that were putting oil into Europe rather than other places. And so that just has dropped those inventories. And part of that is that normally we would be refilling them through the lower travel months. So what would normally be like Q1 you would be refilling inventories, and we didn't do that because we were exporting it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good. Dr. Andrews, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you joining us. At this time, we're going to move straight on to Kent Chandler. I think Kent's online with us. Kent, thank you for holding, and we appreciate you taking time out to be with us today. I know you're currently out of the state, I think, trying to have some family time. So we appreciate you sharing that with us, and we'll turn it straight over to you.
No, I appreciate you having me. Chairman, can you all see my presentation?
We can.
Okay, great. All right. So in the future, I just request, Chairman, that maybe I can go after Dr. Andrews one of these days. It's a tough presentation to follow, but thanks for having me. You had requested me to come today, I think, to follow up on some of the information that Dr. Andrews provided, and to kind of give a insight into what is the information that he provided, what kind of impact does that have on utility regulation, on our end-use utility customers here in the state. So I'll skip through. Most of you all know what the Public Service Commission is. We're a 3-member commission, independent commission that's tucked into the Energy and Environment Cabinet for administrative purposes. We regulate utilities in the state with the exception of municipal utilities and those distribution cooperatives that receive power from the Tennessee Valley Authority. And the only jurisdiction that we have over municipal utilities are for wholesale rates that they charge, water wholesale rates they charge to utilities we do regulate, and those systems for gas safety. So at a fairly high level, and we'll get into some details in a minute, but these trends and issues and impacts that Dr. Andrews was discussing, I would say obviously impact everyday rates. How they impact those rates in the short term and long term are through a few of the items that we deal with at the commission. The first is the fuel adjustment clause, which I'm sure most of you all are aware of, especially over the last 6 to 9 months. That the fuel adjustment clause charges on customers' bills have certainly increased as wholesale power costs and fuel costs have increased. Integrated resource plans. We conduct these are triennial reviews of utilities' current resources to serve customers and what their plans are in the future for those resources. Certificates of public convenience and necessity. Those are certificates that utilities must receive prior to extending service or at a basic level before they build power plants and significant transmission facilities. And then, of course, rate cases. And I'll discuss the first 3 today. The fuel adjustment clause regulation has been in effect for more than 40 years. Prior to the regulation, there was a fuel adjustment clause that utilities had all the way back into the 1950s. But those fuel adjustment clause mechanisms were just embedded in the utilities tariffs that include the charges that they're allowed to pass through. In the 1970s, there was significant volatility in fuel costs. So the commission looked at just not taking those FACs, those fuel adjustment clauses, out of the tariff, but sort of codifying them in regulation to provide, more guardrails on how those costs will be reviewed and regulated. So the fuel adjustment clause at a high level allows jurisdictional utilities to reflect the incremental or decremental cost of purchased power and fuel. So each month, an electric utility that has generating facilities will have incurred some level of fuel costs, whether that be fuel oil or oil distillate or natural gas or coal. And in a subsequent month, they're allowed to pass that cost through to customers. Just to give you all an idea, Kentucky Utilities had about $1.6 billion in retail sales in 2021. And in that year, they incurred about $500 million worth of fuel costs. So you're looking at about a third of the cost. And since rates are cost-based, you're looking at about a third of KU's costs in 2021 were exclusively related to fuel. But fuel expenses can fluctuate wildly. We've kind of been lucky, I guess I say, since the late 2000s, early, probably the last 10 or 15 years, that fuel prices have not been volatile. That especially natural gas prices have really been If there is any volatility, it was to the downside. That's not necessarily been the case over the last year for a number of the reasons that Dr. Andrews mentioned. So how does the FAC work? Well, so whether or not the FAC is a positive number or a negative number, it's relative to a baseline amount of fuel cost that is embedded in a utilities rate. So there's a base amount that is based off of historic experience on what fuel costs are, and whether or not current fuel costs are below or above that amount will determine whether the kilowatt hour surcharge is a positive or a negative credit. So utilities are required to fully document all their fuel costs. It is a significant undertaking for each utility. And the reason for that is because we at the Public Service Commission review all that documentation. It can include fuel purchase contracts, bid sheets that different coal producers provide when they're trying to respond to RFPs by utilities. Lots of different information that would indicate whether or not the utility made the right decision in ultimately choosing that fuel over another. We have formal reviews pursuant to the FAC regulation at 6-month intervals, as well as a final 2-year interval. And in those reviews, we look at 2 primary things. One, whether or not the utility calculated their fuel adjustment rates appropriately and correctly, but also whether or not they, I'll say, improperly conducted their fuel procurement. If either of those are the case, either in the 6-month or the 2-year reviews, the Public Service Commission under the Fuel Adjustment Clause can disallow recovery of costs and refund that to customers. So integrated resource plans are, and this is my best way of describing them without putting the regulation down, but these plans, the regulation for the plans prescribes rules and regular reporting to the Commission for its review of load forecasts and resource plans of electric utilities that show how they're going to meet future demand with an adequate, reliable supply of power within their service territories. These are triennial plans filed every 3 years that have a 15-year planning horizon. It's a significant amount of information that goes into these, a lot of data, historical and projected usage, information on the cost of resources in the past, how much it's expected to run, how much those resources are expected to cost to run in the future, and then whether or not those the systems are performing well, whether or not a power plant is running at only 20% capacity because it's broken all the time, or whether it's running all the time because it's really, really efficient and very cheap. IRPs include a summary of planned resource acquisition or builds, new power plants that may or may not be necessary, and transmission improvements that can deliver electricity to certain areas or provide for additional reliability. Plans are reflected of expected data, and this is really where Dr. Andrews' presentation comes in for IRPs. It really, the output of an integrated resource plan is only as good as the input of data used in creating that plan. So when you're looking at what your expectations are around fuel costs, O&M expenses, environmental and operational costs, all of these and what data is used can play a huge role in what the plans actually recommend going forward for serving customers. So certificates of public convenience and necessity. This is a certificate that's prescribed under statute that prior to construction or acquisition of any major utility facility, a utility has to apply for one of these certificates. The burden of proof lies with the utility, and it has to show that that there's a need for the proposed facility and an absence of wasteful duplication. The utility has to indicate that it's reviewed all reasonable options, as well as various, including various types of new facilities, for instance, if it's a power plant. And it has to be the least cost, most reasonable outcome. So if you're looking at saying one power plant has met the end of its useful life and it needs to be replaced, this review will not just look at least cost in and of itself. It will take into consideration things like risk. If a natural gas facility is expected to be the least cost resource in year 1, but the expectation is that natural gas costs or natural gas prices will increase significantly more than the other inputs into the other types of resources, another resource that may be more expensive might actually be chosen just because of that increased risk of that fuel input. So A couple of considerations here. Again, plant retirements, end of useful life. Sometimes it's more expensive. And this is usually the reason that power plants retires, because the cost of continuing to operate the power plant is actually more expensive than replacing the generation with something else. As Chairman Gooch noted, obviously reliability and resource adequacy are at the front of mind when you're talking about resource choices and the regulation of public utilities. One of the reasons that most of our power plants have retired over the last, let's say, 15, 20 years have been because of current or anticipated environmental regulations, whether or not they can cost effectively employ some sort of environmental mitigation. And if they can't, then their retirement and some sort of replacement. The technical viability and cost of emerging technologies, I know you all will hear some about nuclear today. That's certainly, as Dr. Andrews noted, becoming a bit more pertinent conversation these days. If the only option for nuclear is an AP1000 unit, such as the one Southern Company is building in Georgia, which is about 2,300 megawatts at a cost of approximately $30 billion, none of our utilities, maybe none of our utilities combined, could afford to build those. But if we're talking about units that cost something like $700 million or $1 billion, that may be more in the realm of possibility. And then you also have different other considerations. Purchase power versus steel in the ground. As I noted at my last presentation, I think in front of this committee in the fall, last fall, I have an interest, at least as long as I'm on the commission, that our utilities have enough generating capacity to meet their internal demand. I don't have any anticipation of our utilities being able to lean on markets and be subject more to market forces than they even are today. So this is a slide from that presentation. I just want to note, I know you'll hear a bit more about nuclear, but here are at a very high level, the different types of resources that are available. These are the types of resources that are looked at in those integrated resource plans. Again, wind is hard to cite in Kentucky given our topography. Solar, although it has been, certainly there's a lot of interest in doing solar in Kentucky, but as Dr. Andrews noted, solar is about providing, at this point, cheap electricity. It's not necessarily being able, you can't really depend on it for providing reliability in all hours or that capacity that's required all the time. Nuclear, again, you all, there are people smarter about, know more about nuclear than I do. They'll be able to talk to you about that today, but it's certainly an emerging conversation. Coal, going back to Senator Wheeler's question, it's pretty much impossible to finance, even if you can meet an environmental regulations. Natural gas is often the most, is the least cost resource in terms of generation modeling. But again, there's a significant amount of risk around the volatility of fuel because it can't be stored like coal can. You can't have 60 days of fuel for a natural gas plant like you can 60 days of fuel of a coal plant sitting beside of it. And it's also harder every year to site infrastructure. And you have to ask yourself how long with outstanding or the possibility of environmental regulations, how long will those natural gas plants actually be around? And again, batteries, Dr. Andrews was talking about chemical batteries are a number of years off. I think there's even more interest today than ever in things like hydro batteries, pumped hydro or looped hydro batteries that have been out there for decades now and operating successfully for decades. And again, hydrogen, not yet proven to be cost effective, but it's certainly, again, going back to nuclear at the forefront of emerging conversations. And then I just included this for everybody's benefit. This is the Kentucky Electric Generation profile, I believe from last year. I have an expectation that 2022 is going to look significantly, maybe not significantly is a strong word. It's going to look different than this. My expectation is that the coal percentage is going to be higher and the natural gas percentage is going to be lower, if for no other reason than the reason the natural gas production was so high over the past decade, but certainly in the past year is because of the $2 or $3 gas, whereas it was $9 yesterday or the day before, but it's a little over 8.5 now. So again, Chairman Smith, thanks for having me. Happy to talk to anybody, answer any questions today, or certainly respond to anybody after the fact or any written questions people may have down the road.
Well, Mr. Chandler, thank you very much for your presentation, and again, your willingness to come in front of this committee and speak to us and take our questions. We really, really appreciate that. Do we have any members that have any questions at this time for Mr. Chandler? Okay, yes, please go ahead. We have one question for you.
I have a series of questions, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chandler, one of the common questions and concerns I receive from constituents involves broadband, and I know the PSC is taking a new role in that, and the General Assembly has appropriated significant sums for broadband deployment. Could you give us some insight on what your agency's role is in broadband and the deployment thereof?
Yeah, it's fairly limited. So we were given the only role. Well, let me take a step back. The two primary roles the Public Service Commission would play is the second one was amended in this last session of the General Assembly. The first one is that the Public Service Commission is designated to operate as, I believe it's the FCC's designee for determining of the opportunity for certain broadband providers to take from the Federal Universal Service Fund that provides monthly assistance for broadband. It's kind of an in the weeds issue, but it's for low income customers and their ability to provide either cellular assistance or broadband assistance. So that's the first small role that we play in authorizing those certain telecommunications providers to take from the Universal Service Fund. The second is limited to electric distribution cooperatives. The Public Service Commission regulates distribution cooperatives that do not get their power from the Tennessee Valley Authority, full rate and service regulation. Based on House Bill 320 from the 2021 General Assembly, the electric utilities the electric distribution cooperatives could create subsidiaries, affiliated subsidiaries that could provide broadband, and that there were a couple of roles that the Public Service Commission could play, whether it was to allow the electric utility to borrow money and use that to help fund the affiliate that does broadband, or even allow the utility to build out a fiber network and then lease the excess capacity to that affiliate. There was a bill in the last General Assembly that narrowed the Commission's regulation over that. So now the Commission only needs to provide one of those certificates of public convenience and necessity for the utility to build out a fiber network for electric purposes. But if as I read the law, if the electric utility, the electric distribution cooperative is going to build a fiber network exclusively for broadband purposes and won't be using them for electric purposes, that a CPCN may not be necessary.
Brief follow-up. Is the Public Service Commission involved in any regulatory or regulation process, and have you adopted any regulations involving broadband?
Yeah, so we have a case in front of us that was initiated last year and is submitted to the Commission for a decision from Kinergy in order for them to provide, build out a fiber network, get a CPCN for a fiber network, and provide to lease that access to an affiliate for that affiliate to be able to provide broadband service. So that's in front of us now, awaiting a decision. Separate from that, House Bill 320 from the 2021 session required that the Public Service Commission promulgate regulations regarding pole attachments. And those pole attachments, a primary reason for the promulgation of those regulations was around broadband attachments to poles that the electric utilities, both the distribution cooperatives as well as the investor-owned utilities have. We were already in the process of doing those regulations, and about a month after the General Assembly adjourned sine die in 2021, we filed those. Those are officially promulgated. It was about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 dozen pages of brand new pole attachment regulations. And we specifically defined what a broadband provider was. And I think that was, I'll say, well received by both electric utilities and broadband providers for putting more on paper, I guess, in terms of what the expectations are moving forward around pole attachments, especially broadband pole attachments.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Planner, thank you. Seeing no other comments, Mr. Chandler, thank you for your time. We appreciate you as always. And if there's any additional follow-up with them, we can reach out and send it to you via email. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, for the last topic we're going to tackle today, it's going to be the advanced nuclear power. I'd like to go ahead and ask all those that have signed up to come to the table. I was looking for Senator Carroll and his group. Thought we might see Senator Leeper here with us today. Would have been a good one to come forward to talk about this.
So we have two that are doing remote.
And we have Senator Carroll. You have two other guests that'll be joining us via remote. Is that correctly? Is that correct? Excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, real quickly, I'm just going to set the stage for this, and I'm going to step away to allow our guests as much time as possible. If we do have time at the end, I'll close it out. This meeting and these folks being here is a result of conversations that began last year, initiated by a young man named Julian Colvin, who is a nuclear engineer student. I think it's at North Carolina State University. He reached out to myself, Representative Prunty, and initiated a conversation we didn't really take too seriously in the beginning, but once we talked to him, I was sold. A very impressive young man from Central Kentucky who has an interest in nuclear energy and is doing what he can from his position to further that within the Commonwealth. We ended up in a conversation with Christine King, the Idaho National Lab, and she will be presenting, and some other things have spawned out of that. This is the first step in an effort to educate the legislature on advanced technologies in nuclear energy. You all know my interest, Representative Bridges' interest, who also serves with me on the NCSL Nuclear Legislative Work Group. We lifted the nuclear moratorium in Kentucky a few years ago with the Leaper Act. My predecessor, who worked many years in that effort, and as sometimes it happens, for no reason, things just break loose, and we were able to get that bill passed. Right now, this is the first step. We're looking on bringing a large-scale nuclear seminar to Kentucky, and hopefully to develop some type of association with one of these entities, perhaps today, that will be presenting to have an entity within the Commonwealth that is pushing nuclear energy. So that's one of the steps that we're doing. And then we're also working with Christine King in an effort to get funding to do a study within the Commonwealth related to the feasibility of nuclear energy. So a lot going on. We didn't do much for several years after the moratorium was lifted, simply because of the prices of gas and those being so inexpensive, and there was no need for the competition. I'm convinced that nuclear is the baseload energy of the future in this country. And it's exciting, the technology that is being developed at this time, and these folks will tell you a lot more about that. And, Mr. Chairman, I'll step away.
And if we could, just for our housekeeping, as your guests come up, please identify yourself for our records so we have it on here. And at this point, we'll turn it over to you at the table there.
Okay. Good afternoon. And my name is Bob Deasy. I'm the Senior Vice President with Tennessee Valley Authority. And I want to thank you all for having us here today. TVA and the state of Kentucky, we've had a great partnership over the last many years, and friendship, and we look forward to continuing that. And I'd like to introduce my cohort here.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Shea. I'm with the Tennessee Valley Authority. I'm the Vice President for Advanced Nuclear Technology within TVA. And I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
I think listening to a lot of the comments from Dr. Andrews is a great lead into TVA's new nuclear program that we're about to undertake. A little bit about myself. I introduced myself. I've been with the Tennessee Valley Authority for 15 years. I've done a lot of work up here in Kentucky. I have done a lot of maintenance and modification work on our coal fleet. I have built the new natural gas combined cycle plants out at the Paradise plant. I have been involved with a lot of the tornado recoveries that happened this past year out in the western part of the state. So very familiar with the state of Kentucky. And now I'm focused here on the new nuclear program at TVA. If we can, one of the things about TVA, we've been in the nuclear business for a long time. 39% of our fleet, our baseload capacity, is nuclear. We do have a good mix of power. We have nuclear, coal, natural gas, hydro, and renewables. I think going back to what Dr. Andrews talked about with the challenges that we face with energy, a good example is next week in the Tennessee Valley Authority region. We're looking at probably peak days of 30,000 megawatts. Proud to say that TVA does have the generation and the capacity to be able to serve that 30,000 megawatts of power that will be needed for the Tennessee Valley Authority. So as we continue to grow, if you look at this first slide here, it really talks a lot about what Dr. Andrews had talked about. The blue line is the growth. We have a lot of growth within the Tennessee Valley Authority. And we're also challenged with reducing our carbon. Now, we have reduced our carbon over 63% since 2005 to 2020. And we do have aggressive goals to continue to reduce carbon, and that is through plant retirements and also adding on renewables. However, when we reduce our carbon footprint, we can get to a point of about 80% by 2035. By 2035, to get to being carbon-free by 2050, that last 20% is our biggest challenge. So we're out here exploring the different technologies that are available. We're looking at small modular nuclear reactors. We're looking at our hydro fleet. What can we do more with our hydro fleet, whether it's additional pump storage. You have carbon capture, you have solar, you have battery storage, and you have hydrogen. And as you just heard earlier from Dr. Andrews and the Public Utilities Commission chairman, a lot of that is still new technology. It's innovation, but it's not developed yet. So TVA's nuclear power and construction expertise. We do have the third largest fleet in the United States. TVA's Watts Bar Unit 2, which is the nation's first new nuclear power generation in 20 years, that entered into commercial operations in 2016. And at any given time, we have about 900 active projects totaling $12 billion somewhere in the construction stage. So when it comes to construction, we certainly have that background when it comes to building power plants, repairing dams, or other large vertical projects. So we're here today to talk a little bit about small modular reactors. We have a site called the Clinch River Nuclear Project. It's down in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. This cartoon here on the screen depicts the size of a small modular reactor. You could probably fit it in a football field. It's a very passive plant. The technology that we're looking at is called a GE Hitachi. It's a X300, but it's just technology that we're continuing to explore. We have not made a full commitment on it. However, we believe it is probably the best available technology that's out there in the market today. I'm going to have Joe, if you'd like to speak a little bit about it. Joe did a lot of the technology selection for us as we looked it out there. But again, we haven't made our commitment yet, but this is one of the ones that TVA has taken very serious.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Bob. So TVA has been actively looking at advanced nuclear technologies even while we were completing.
Please check your mic for me there, please. So we want to make sure to hear you. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, TVA has been actively looking at advanced nuclear technologies for about a decade, even while we were completing Watts Bar Unit 2. And as we looked at what we might need on the system in the future years, there certainly was a look at moving away from the very large units of the size of Watts Bar and Browns Ferry, and looking for something that would be fit within the transmission system needs, more able to follow load, more able to adapt to renewables and be complementary to those. And in doing that, we looked at over a dozen different technologies, from variations of the current generations of light water-cooled reactors to many of the innovative designs that are being funded by the federal government and private investment. And as I mentioned, we looked at over a dozen of those, and our perspective was that if we wanted to move ahead with the next generation on the system, we wanted to look at technologies that had the least technology risk, the least financial risk, the least construction project risk. And out of that was our conclusion, as Bob alluded to, that a variation of an existing light water reactor, the GE product that Bob mentioned, was our near-term focus.
And I'm sorry, just a quick question. Are you all using thorium reactors? Is that what your current technology is? Or I was listening to see which one you'd actually chosen. I'm sorry, Chairman Gooch had notified me that he's got another meeting, so I might have missed that part.
Yeah, the reactors that we currently operate and the ones that we're looking at are not thorium-powered reactors. They're natural uranium-powered reactors.
Okay, excellent. So we have an early site permit, and to begin on the process of putting a small modular reactor down, you have to first go out for an early site permit. That can take a number of years. TVA has the first early site permit in the United States today, and it's located down at our Clinch River facility, which is in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. That site, it was a site of a former TVA nuclear plant, it was called the Clinch Breeder Reactor, that TVA abandoned back in the 1980s when we abandoned quite a few other nuclear plants that were under construction. As I said, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has issued us an early site permit, and it's back in 2019, so we do have a permitted site. It is a licensed site to put a small modular reactor on that site. In order for us to do that, we had to do a programmatic environmental impact statement. And that impact statement is where we look at the site, we look at what technology could be placed there and the impacts it could have to the environment. So we're in the process of doing that impact statement now, and we'll be releasing that sometime this fall. In order to, a little bit about how do you get there to actually get a small modular reactor? Well, through the process, we're in what we call our decision gate number 1. You'll see that it's on the left-hand side of the screen. And this is where we look into the design, the type of a design that we'll select, the licensing. We have to gather a lot of information, a lot of studies, seismic, hydrology, different evaluations that are out there. We put it together in a package to get ready to submit what we would call a construction permit application to the NRC. And then we're also in the estimating. We're looking at how much is this going to cost? Can we do it? We look at supply chain. We look at scheduling. One of the things before we go forward with what we call Decision Gate 2, we'll have to go back to the TVA Board of Directors and say, we've done extensive studies on this site. We looked at the cost. Is this cost effective? We've looked at the technology selection. Is this the right technology for us to move forward with? Now, the cost may not be cost effective for us to move forward, or it could. So we have a decision gate at that point where we have an off-ramp, or we could delay the project. But in order for us to move forward, if we were to submit a construction permit application at Design Gate 2, I always tell everyone, before we could put a shovel in the ground, if we're going to build a small modular reactor, it's about 4 years from today. So it's a bit of a long process because of the regulatory process that we have to follow, the planning and the studying that we have to do. This just can't be another nuclear project that runs over budget or behind schedule. This is a project that if we're going to do it, we're going to make a commitment to it, that we have it well laid out, that we can meet the cost, that we can meet the schedule, and we have selected the right technology. That concludes our presentation, so we're certainly here. We're really here today to engage with questions on small modular reactors or the selected site that we have, or some of the studies that we have, or our experience as a nuclear plant operator.
Appreciate Senator Carroll working this out, and this has had a very rich history in the state of Kentucky. As he mentioned earlier, Senator Leeper had petitioned for many years to be able to get this voted out of the Senate. I think it was not until 2008 that it was finally taken up to move out, but he was just an ardent supporter of the technology, and I'd say he still is. So I appreciate Senator Carroll picking it up and carrying it in his tenure. So very, very important issue. I think it's probably on people's radar more now because of the spikes in their utilities and what they're seeing happen with the energy grid and across this country. So I think it's got a lot of attention right now. I think people are looking at it. We appreciate you coming forward to share more information in front of our committee. So at this time, we'll see if we have any. Representative Gibbons-Prunty has our first question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your presentation. As you know, I represent Muhlenberg County, where Paradise is, and we had units 1, 2. Thankful for the gas plants, the recycle, and the plans for the more. We have more than a football field there, so I mean, I'm still an advocate for coal to be in the mix keep the cost down for the consumer. But can you talk about the safety of the waste and getting rid of the waste and that sort of thing with the small modules?
Yes, I'm going to defer that question to Joe. But before we answer that question, one of Joe's roles is to look at future sites, and that includes we're going to look at future sites in the state of Kentucky as well. Joe, I'm going to let you answer.
Certainly. With regard to the waste, the waste for the technologies that we're looking at is spent fuel specifically is similar to the forms that the current reactors use, and at one level, there's no federal solution that's currently in place, but there are interim solutions that all of the existing 92 operating reactors use, which is temporary on-site storage. So our perspective is that would be a viable storage mechanism and approach to dealing with any spent fuel from SMRs. It's safe to be stored on-site.
Okay, a brief follow-up. What are temporary? I mean, how long is temporary on-site storage? What does that mean?
The designs that are currently in use for storing spent fuel are licensed for 20 years at a time. I think some are in their second 20-year period, but there's no particular reason why they couldn't be stored for decades until there's a federal solution safely on site.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I guess Rep. Prutney would like to certainly invite you to come down to Wattsboro, one of our other operating nuclear plants where we do have spent fuel storage for you to see that. And it's very small with the amount of fuel that we burn and where we store it. It's a very small location, very small area.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. We have Representative Bridges who have our next questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. In earlier presentations, we heard about the difficulties in the financial support, like in the coal industries. Do you see any of those complications or prohibitions in the nuclear area?
One of the elements from a financial standpoint that we're challenged with is the deployment of a first-of-a-kind reactor. So if we look at the projects in South Carolina and Georgia, those ran into project challenges that strained them financially, but they were first-of-a-kind deployments of that AP1000 technology. So that is something that, as Bob alluded to, as we're planning the project, we need to make sure that we are very careful that we don't put that financial first-of-a-kind risk unduly on the ratepayers. So our perspective is that there's a partnership that would be warranted. It could be a private one, but more likely a federal partnership for the first-of-a-kind financial assist to get the projects moving.
Just to add a little bit on that, we have, I'm sure you've seen some of the news announcements where we have partnered with Ontario Power up in Canada. And Ontario Power up in Canada, they have made their commitment already to build a small modular reactor at their Darlington site. And the technology that they have selected is the technology that TVA is considering right now. So they would be a first-of-a-kind, be the first ones out of the chute. And if TVA were to move forward with that particular technology through the partnership, the collaboration agreement that we have with them, we would have a lot of lessons learned from the Ontario Power Group, as well as we'd be able to share our operating costs as an operating nuclear fleet, I should say our operations with the Ontario Power Group, because it is a boiling water reactor, light water reactor, which is something TVA has a lot of experience in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Bob, I have a question. You know, I've supported nuclear, the votes that have come up here before. I do think it's a feasible option for us as we look at the future of it, but there's still a lot of people that are concerned about like the nuclear meltdown. They've seen all the stuff, the TV shows and all the scary stuff that's out there, but when you really dive into it, that's not necessarily the truth of it. And I wonder if you could share with members here that may have, this is their first time on this committee and their first time to be, you know, hearing about nuclear to look at going forward, and kind of assure them with what the safety protocols are and what realistically is, other than the side of the Hollywood aspect of the nuclear meltdown, of what the safety protocols actually really are.
Well, I'm gonna ask Joe to speak to that. And the reason why I'm going to ask Joe to speak to that, now I've worked in nuclear for 20 plus years, and it is very safe. But Joe, prior to Joe coming to the Tennessee Valley Authority in his early careers, he was on a naval nuclear carrier, and he was also spent time with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where he was part of the other side that evaluated the safety. Joe?
Thanks, Bob. The approach to safety in the U.S. is to take what's called a layered approach, or a defense in-depth approach, and to make sure that there are, by design and by operation, layers of safety that are between the fuel itself and any hazard that it may represent and members of the public. And so that's the fundamental approach to safety. And I can touch on those barriers. The view for small modular reactors and advanced reactors is to take that 4-layer concept, which is demonstrated to be safe in the United States, and make it even safer. That is, so that's the philosophical approach to safety in this country, and moving forward into small modular reactors. And I can take further questions, but that's at a high level.
No, and I appreciate it. Just that's one of the things that often gets lobbed at the industry, and when you dive into that and actually look at that, you'll find out there's a lot of protocols, there's a lot of fail-safes built into it. It's in our nuclear reactors for our submarine fleet, used daily by many of our naval officers, and without incident. But I just wanted to point that out because we have a lot of new members on this committee. This is probably the first time they've talked about it, and if you don't have a full understanding of it, then that's an easy thing for somebody to lob out of it. I'm sorry, you said, Representative McCormick, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It pretty much answered my question. I know that there is, from the general public, there is a lot of concern about health risk to nuclear energy. And if you want to elaborate any more on it, but your response to the chairman's question kind of answered a lot of that. But I do know that there is a tremendous amount of fear among the general public when it comes to nuclear energy.
Yes, I think the designs that are coming out with these small modular reactors now, it's called design in depth, and the safety is already there with the existing reactors. And with these new small modular reactors, the designs that they have now that they're planning, that's the primary focus, is the safety of these reactors and the safety to health and safety of the general public.
Thank you.
And I might add to that, I mentioned the 4 barriers, or the 4-layered. That's kind of an approach to safety from an event, from a specific accident event. But and that's we've not had that in a way that in this country that's affected the health and safety of the public. In addition to that, there are recurring studies on what are the health effects in the environments around these plants, and so that's looked at, and those studies have over the years demonstrated there are not correlatable health effects from the operation of these plants in the public around them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I see Senator Carroll's come back to it, and we're going to turn it over to him to kind of let him wrap up this time.
Mr. Chairman, we still have one presenter, Christine King, that is online. And your question on the safety, and that's kind of where the new technology comes into play, And that's really part of the efforts, the major part of the efforts that we're going to be making over the months to come, is to educate all of us within the legislature on the newer technology and the safety aspects of that. And Christine King is online, and she can, I think she's going to talk a little bit more about the newer technologies.
Christine,
Thank
go
you,
ahead.
Senator Carroll.
Go ahead.
Can you
Yeah.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today. And I'm hoping that this is the first of a few conversations we have. So I'm the director for the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. And this is an initiative from the Department of Energy. And our main goal is to facilitate public-private partnerships across the national labs to further the vision of these private companies that are either sustaining our existing nuclear fleet or designing and commercializing new nuclear technologies. A little bit about me: I'm a chemical engineer from NC State. I was the one that took a little chance on Julian Colvin in a chat. He was wanting to know more about advanced reactors, and we started talking. I have worked in the commercial nuclear fleet for over 25 years prior to taking this role. Actually, in March, during our visit at Oak Ridge, we actually walked down the Clinch River site with Dan Stout, who's since retired from TVA. But it was really interesting to walk down a site and think about what early nuclear projects look like. I'm not here to tell you that nuclear is the right answer for Kentucky. That's your decision. But I want to ensure that you have the information and the resources you need to consider nuclear technologies. So the DOE and the national labs are committing to understanding your needs and your questions as we work on de-risking these future commercial nuclear projects. And that's why I actually came into this job. I think there is an important role for the DOE and the national labs to put our resources to good use in enabling future commercial projects. But a lot of that does involve de-risking these projects so that you can be confident in your decisions going forward. I wanted to talk a little bit today about how you might consider a feasibility study around advanced nuclear in Kentucky. That's been a lot of our conversation between myself and Senator Carroll. You could look at this through several different lenses. First of all, you could do a technical evaluation looking at different reactor designs. You could do that at a higher level, looking at the generic aspects of a design against your specific objectives. That could be done by a specific owner operator like TVA. You could progress that evaluation into looking at specific designs and or developers. These assessments include kind of a review of the capability, kind of think what it will do when the design is complete, and maturity. Where is the design today? And what is the level of effort necessary to get that design ready to build? You can include cost and construction criteria, as well as exclusionary factors, like we definitely don't want designs that do the following. Maybe that is, we're not interested in building a 1,000 megawatt Vogtle size plant. Or maybe there's factors that I would prefer not to, maybe not to have something that has a large footprint, but maybe that's okay. So that's kind of exclusionary and avoidance factors. And the Electric Power Research Institute actually has, they're developing a guide to help that type of technical evaluation, which would be available to the utilities in Kentucky through that membership. The technical evaluation also could be looked at it in terms of integrating into the current electricity system you have, how you consider the preservation of the existing assets you have, what that transition might look like, maximize the future renewable use, and potentially repurposing coal stations with advanced nuclear. Think like SMRs or other mid-sized nuclear units, which are similarly sized to the coal units, and also have a similar temperature and pressure profile. From a market evaluation, you could kind of work backwards from the industries you have today, and or looking at the technologies that you want to support, and looking at those energy needs and how you might provide either the electricity or the high temperature heat and steam that they need. And finally, I think this has come up in a couple of the questions that I've heard so far, feasibility could be through the lens of the community, either looking at the economic impacts associated of installing nuclear technologies into a community, or looking at the history that Kentucky has had with nuclear and developing a state-specific strategy that's mindful of those lessons learned. This year, GAIN has been working with the Office of Energy Policy with Director Kenya Stump, hosting some webinars talking about future energy planning. We have a workshop coming up on June 29th with the utilities across the state to talk about feasibility studies and what those important elements might be for Kentucky. The workshop actually begins with perspectives from 3 utilities that have announced advanced nuclear plans, and 2 utilities who are hosting the advanced nuclear demonstration projects along the way. I'm going to go out on a limb on behalf of Kenya, but if you're interested in the workshop, I'm sure we'd be glad to have your voice in the room. And again, being mindful of the time, I'm going to end my remarks here, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk today.
Very good. We appreciate you joining us, and your comments are duly noted. At this time, I see Senator Carroll. We'll just make sure we have everybody. Is there anyone else? Okay, yes. David, I just noticed you at the table. Sorry about that. We're glad to have you at the table, and I understand you have some comments, so we yield to you, David. David, please turn your mic on for us, please.
There you go. Good afternoon, Chairman Smith and the other members of the committee. I'm going to shorten my comments given the time constraints. Again, I represent the United States Nuclear Industry Council. We're a leading advocate for American advanced nuclear energy technologies. We represent more than 80 companies engaged in nuclear innovation and supply chain development, including technology developers, manufacturers, construction engineers, key utility movers, and service providers. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to testify today and for holding this important hearing. As we all know, climate change has garnered significant attention at every level of government and the private sector. While there is no one thing policymakers can do to solve this challenge, accelerating the global deployment of cutting-edge American nuclear technologies is important to driving down carbon dioxide emissions while meeting the world's growing clean energy needs. Without a larger share of nuclear power from both existing and advanced reactors, these pledges are less likely to succeed and will certainly be more expensive as more countries and corporate entities commit to trying to get to net zero carbon dioxide emissions. Thankfully, on the national level, the United States Congress has recognized the importance of nuclear energy from both a clean energy and competitiveness perspective. On a bipartisan basis, in the 115th, 116th, and 117th Congresses, legislation has been passed that makes America's nuclear industry stronger. These legislative victories have provided robust support for the existing civilian nuclear fleet, which provides about half the total clean energy generation in this country, and have catalyzed the next generation of advanced reactors. I'm just going to skip ahead because, again, I know we're running short on time. We're currently seeing a flurry of next-generation advanced nuclear reactor technology companies out there, including Oklo, BWXT, X-Energy, TerraPower, GE Hitachi, Kairos, NuScale, and many more. And they're all on the cusp of being ready to build these new technologies in this decade. As a matter of fact, just today it was announced that the Department of Defense has issued an award to BWXT to essentially build the first of these advanced reactor technologies. This is their microreactor design, which will be look to be deployed in Idaho National Lab property there with the target of 2024. So very, very near term. Advanced reactors fall into a variety of sizes and categories. You've heard some of the discussion on that today, including microreactors of less than 10 megawatts electric, all the way to small modular reactors with individual modules having outputs ranging up to 300 megawatts electric. These designs comprise both light water reactor designs, which are the current fleet that's out there right now, the larger reactors, as well as designs include high temperature gas-cooled reactors, molten salt reactors, and fast reactors. While different designs have varying timetables given their design maturity and licensing schedule with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, there are multiple advanced reactor designs that could, and in fact probably will be, deployed later this decade. We are truly at an exciting time for the American nuclear industry. Nuclear power has reemerged as a smart, reliable power source and an integral part of global emissions reductions efforts. A flurry of next-generation nuclear reactor companies are all on the cusp of building reactors in the next decade. These technologies will provide clean, reliable power and create jobs in the local communities, but they also offer additional benefits relative to traditional reactors. Advanced reactors are smaller, which allows them to be sited in new locations. They can operate flexibly to complement renewable energy. They are walk-away safe, and they can decarbonize industries beyond just the power sector. In closing, I'm reminded of the long historical role that Kentucky has played in supporting the commercial nuclear supply chain through the decades of uranium enrichment operations at Paducah. I'm encouraged by this committee's serious consideration of the role advanced nuclear technology can play in meeting Kentucky's future energy needs. And we at the United States Nuclear Industry Council stand ready to support you as a resource as you continue your evaluations and considerations. So thank you for having me today.
David, thank you. And I was thinking you'd mentioned the molten salt reactor, and I had just, in my spare time, read a series on the thorium and the molten salt reactor, but I was noticing that one of the safety protocols for a lot of the new ones are the salt, the frozen salt plug. So, for example, if there was a power outage or something happened in the region, that the plug itself will melt because it's not getting refrigeration, therefore flooding the cooling towers and shuts itself off, kind of like flipping the old lamp for a Coleman lantern, snuffing it out. But I'm just looking at some of the fail-safe precautions that I was not made aware of before. But what is it two separate technologies with the thorium and the molten salt, or are those a combined technology? And not to get too far in the weeds with you, but for some reason I thought they were the same technology, or pretty much joined.
They can be. Thorium offers the opportunity to fuel different designs. It's a different fuel cycle, but it has the opportunity to offer different designs. But I'm impressed with your reading and research. I think there's definitely the possibility of making a nuclier engineer.
Trust me. If it's energy, it's on my plate. But so thorium, does it have a longer, I guess, life for it? Is that one of the things that they're talking about as far as the utility for a plant of its nature, or?
I think there are many different considerations between the uranium and the thorium fuel cycle, including the abundance of the element in nature itself.
Yeah,
so,
cost.
But I will say one of the things the council has been talking with a number of entities here in Kentucky about trying to support and host or co-host a seminar, an educational event in Kentucky where we can bring more details on these different technologies, the different companies involved, and have some kind of a symposium, make it available for, obviously the public, but also the policymakers at the state and local levels. So we look.
Well, we appreciate it. I think that this committee holds dear that it's one of our great responsibilities to look at all of these and not just talk about it, but to truly take a look at it and devote the type of time that having this seat up here deserves, so that we do find out what's best for the ratepayers out there and the people on the other side of this equation. So I appreciate attendance from all of our members today. If I have no other questions I see, I'll yield to Senator Carroll to go ahead and wrap us up.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it, and I thank all of you all for sticking around to hear this. And and I know this is controversial with a lot of people, but all I ask for you all is to keep an open mind and take a look at the new technology and understand that it is much safer. And there's technology in the works now that's not prepared to even announce. So it's going to be a supply of base load that is dependable. It's carbon free. It's something that can be bipartisan in our efforts to support it. And in our Commonwealth, our strength for economic development has always been inexpensive sources of power. None of us like it that the coal industry is declining. We wish it wasn't that way, but that's the reality. And the future is uncertain in that area, but we know that we're looking towards other baseload supplies, and we know that nuclear is that dependable source that will move this state forward. We have to be careful that we don't get behind, and I'm afraid that's where we're headed, that we're going to let other states get in front of us, and as far as economic development with low-cost power, they're going to clean our clock in that area. And we need to move forward, and that's what the efforts are about now. And we'll continue to do that. We hope to work with the industry council to get a somewhat of an organization built in Kentucky to start supporting that. I haven't approached the executive branch yet. I know that if I'm not mistaken, Christine and her folks have spoken with the executive branch about the possibilities in the future. But I think it can be a bipartisan effort, and I think it's something we can agree on. Safety has always been the big issue, and I know, Senator Webb, that's something that you've had a lot of concerns about. You know, at home, we're used to nuclear. We had the gaseous diffusion plant. Corey Hicks, who I've been communicating with, works with the Four Rivers Nuclear Partnership. They're the contractor that is cleaning up that site now. We have spent fuel on site. We're trying to attract a laser enrichment company to come in to re-enrich the spent fuel that we have on site in Paducah. So our community, our part of the state embraces nuclear, and we hope that it's someday within the next decade that we're able to attract a company. Hopefully TVA would be the obvious first choice to maybe build a reactor, small modular reactor within Paducah at that site. So that's kind of where we are, but jobs, inexpensive power, dependable power, carbon-free, economic development, it meets all the things that we need in this Commonwealth. So all I ask is that you please keep an open mind as we move forward. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for indulging us through this effort. And I want to thank all of our guests that came and traveled long distances to be here today to bring this information. Jeff Harmon with Senate staff helping coordinate this, and Mr. Chairman, your committee staff for helping put all this together. I'm very grateful for all the efforts. Thank you, sir.
All right, very good. So do I have a motion to adjourn? All those in favor of the sign of aye. We stand adjourned. Thank you all.